At my wedding, my mom humiliated me by demanding my entire $8,500 salary, saying, "If you want to be a wife, then start by paying me rent for raising you." When my bridesmaids laughed, I froze, then my grandma whispered, "Your mom did the same to me." But I never spoke. The room fell silent. My name is Margot Klein, and I was born and raised in a small town just outside Asheville, North Carolina. My life, from the outside, looked stable, one of those tidy Southern upbringings where you go to church every Sunday, smile at neighbors, and keep family issues locked behind closed doors. But inside our two-story clapboard home with green shutters and a wraparound porch, life was more complicated. My mother, Vera, was the kind of woman who could be charming in public but terrifying at home. She had this way of twisting love into something that always cost you something: your pride, your money, your silence. My father, Russ, left when I was 7. He told me he couldn't breathe around her anymore. I didn't understand it then. Now, I do. My only escape was my grandmother, Inez. She lived in a modest cottage just 10 minutes down the road. I'd bike there after school whenever I could. She always had lemon cake, a warm hug, and a quiet way of listening that made me feel safe. I did everything right, or at least I thought I did. Graduated from the University of North Carolina with a business degree, got a job in Charlotte working for a medical logistics firm, and worked my way up to earning $8,500 a month, something that felt like freedom. Or so I believed. I met Jonah during a networking event in Durham. He was kind, quiet, and had a steadiness about him that reminded me of the world I'd always wanted, a world where you didn't walk on eggshells. We dated for 2 years before he proposed on a foggy mountain trail in Boone. I thought marriage would be the beginning of my new life. But in my family, every beginning has to start with a debt. Planning the wedding was exhausting, not because of the logistics, but because of my mother. "I hope you're not expecting me to pay for anything," she said during one of our early phone calls. "You've got that big fancy job, don't you?" "I wasn't asking for money, Mom. I just thought, maybe you'd want to be involved," I replied. "I'm involved by being your mother. That's enough." I had saved for the wedding myself, and Jonah's parents generously offered to cover the venue, an old converted cotton mill in Hillsboro. It was rustic, beautiful, and held just enough space for 75 people. My mother was offended that she wasn't involved in choosing the venue, the dress, the catering, or the guest list, even though she'd turned down every invitation to help. She had RSVP'd last minute, and I knew that meant she was planning something. Vera never did anything without a purpose. I was nervous, but my bridesmaids, Lucy, Zara, and Nia, kept me calm. The wedding day arrived, and I was a bundle of nerves but also excitement. Jonah looked incredible in his navy blue suit, and when we locked eyes during the ceremony, I felt like all the pain and chaos of my upbringing had finally led me somewhere good. But good doesn't last long in a family like mine. During the reception, I was called up to say a few words. I stood, holding Jonah's hand, feeling braver than I ever had. And then I heard her voice. "Well, since we're all talking about the future," my mother called out, stepping forward with her glass raised, "how about we talk about the past, too?" The music stopped. Chairs squeaked. My bridesmaids exchanged confused glances. Jonah looked at me, eyes wide. My mother walked up to the microphone. "You all think she's some successful woman now with her job and her nice salary," she said, smirking. "Well, I say this, if you want to be a wife, Margot, maybe start by paying your damn rent. I raised you, fed you, clothed you. That salary? You owe it to me." The crowd gasped. My bridesmaids chuckled nervously, thinking it was a joke. "She makes $8,500 a month, did y'all know that?" she continued. "I'll take every cent, thank you very much. That's back pay." I stood frozen. My hands were shaking. Jonah stood too, trying to usher me away from the microphone, but I couldn't move. And then I felt a hand on my shoulder. My grandmother, Inez, had appeared beside me. She leaned in close, her voice barely above a whisper. Your mom did the same to me, she said. But I never spoke. The silence, it cost me everything. Inez turned and walked back to her seat. The room fell dead silent. That moment changed something in me. I picked up the mic, not knowing what I was going to say, only knowing that I couldn't live another day in silence. You want to talk about debt? I said, my voice louder than I thought it would be. Okay. Let's talk about it. You told me love was conditional. That it had to be earned. That I had to pay for the privilege of being raised. You called me selfish when I wanted to go to college out of town. You told me I owed you for every sandwich, every ride to school, every Christmas present. I saw guests glance awkwardly toward their wine glasses. My aunt shifted in her chair. But I kept going. But the truth is, Mom, you didn't raise me. You broke me, over and over again. And every time I tried to love you, you turned it into a transaction. You can keep your debt. I'm done paying. I handed the mic back to the DJ and walked off the stage, my heart racing. That night, my mother left early. She didn't say goodbye. Inez came up to me after most guests had left and hugged me longer than she ever had before. You did what I never had the courage to do, she said. Jonah wrapped his arm around me and whispered, let's go home. In the weeks that followed, I blocked my mother's number. She sent a few emails, some laced with guilt, others with threats. I didn't respond to any of them. Jonah and I moved into a new apartment in Charlotte. We painted the walls a soft yellow, filled the kitchen with herbs and spices, and adopted a black lab mix named Rue. I still think about that day sometimes, not with regret, but with clarity. Breaking the silence cost me something too, the illusion that I could fix my mother. That if I was just good enough, successful enough, loving enough, she'd finally treat me like a daughter instead of a debt. But I gained something bigger. A voice. A new family. Peace. And every Sunday, I drive out to see Inez. We sit on her porch, drink sweet tea, and talk about everything, especially the things we used to stay quiet about. Because silence may be comfortable, but truth is what heals. If you're so grown up now, Margot, with your big job and your big wedding, then maybe it's time you paid me back. $8,500 a month? I want all of it. That's the rent you owe me for 28 years of raising you. My bridesmaids laughed nervously. They thought she was joking. I couldn't move. Couldn't speak. And then my grandma leaned in beside me and whispered, your mom did the same thing to me once, but I never spoke. The whole room went quiet. I'm 28, female, and newly married. My husband, Jonah 31M, and I had our wedding in Hillsborough, North Carolina, a small, historical town between Raleigh and Greensboro. We both love old architecture, and we found this restored cotton mill that had been converted into an event space. Exposed brick, string lights, hardwood floors, it was exactly what I dreamed of, and I paid for nearly all of it myself. I work as a supply chain manager for a medical logistics firm in Charlotte. It's a demanding but good job, and I make about $8,500 a month before taxes. I only mention this because it becomes painfully relevant later. My relationship with my mother, Vera 62F, has always been rocky. On the surface, she's a charming, sarcastic, no-nonsense Southern woman. People outside the family find her funny and bold. But inside the family, she's a different person, controlling, emotionally manipulative, and weirdly obsessed with power. Especially financial power. She raised me alone after my father left when I was 7. I used to think he was a coward for leaving. I used to blame him. But the older I got, the more I understood. Dara made everything a transaction. Love, time, support, it all came with strings. If she drove me to a friend's house, I owed her silence later when she yelled at me for not folding the laundry. If she helped with a school project, I'd hear about it for months. She never missed a chance to tell me how much I cost her. And while she didn't physically torment me, she did say things like, you were a burden from the moment I gave birth. I should have charged your father child support until I was dead. If I had a nickel for every time you whined about your life, I'd be able to retire already. I moved out the moment I turned 18, took on student loans, and worked full-time through college. Still, she always managed to insert herself back into my life, usually through guilt. Every time I had a success, she found a way to undermine it. When Jonah proposed to me, I didn't even want to tell her. But I did, because I thought maybe, this time, she'd rise to the occasion. Be the proud mom. Join me in this milestone. She did the opposite. When I called to tell her the news, she replied with, "Well, don't expect me to pay for a thing. I've paid for enough." I wasn't asking her to pay for anything. I never asked her to contribute. I told her that calmly, but she just said, "We'll see if you really go through with it. You're just like your father, always chasing fairy tales." Despite that, I invited her. Sent her a printed invitation. Left her a seat at the family table. I even offered to pick out a dress for her if she wanted to go shopping together. She declined every time. She RSVP'd yes a week before the wedding. I should have known something was up. The day of the wedding was beautiful. Sunny, early autumn air. Crisp enough to wear a wrap, warm enough that the outdoor ceremony didn't chill the guests. Jonah and I wrote our own vows. I cried through mine. I felt like I'd finally made it out of something. Like I had clawed my way out of the shadow of my childhood and into a real life. The reception was warm and joyful. People danced. Laughed. My bridesmaids, Lucy, Zara, and Nia, were making jokes and drinking champagne. Jonah's parents gave a lovely toast. We cut the cake. I was feeling safe. Then the DJ invited us to speak. I said a few thank you words. Jonah did too. Then, uninvited, my mother walked up to the mic. At first, everyone thought she was going to give a toast. People clapped. She raised her champagne flute. But her smile was not right. "I'm not going to lie and pretend I'm emotional right now," she began. "I'm not. Margot here makes $8,500 a month working some fancy job in the city. You'd think she'd be grateful to the woman who gave her life, huh?" I looked around, confused. My friends' faces were tense. "Well, I've decided I want what's mine," she said. "If you want to play wife and start a new life, you better start by paying your dues. I want that salary. All of it. Call it back rent." At that, my bridesmaids laughed nervously. One of them said under her breath, "Is this a joke?" But I didn't laugh. I felt my blood freeze. My legs wouldn't move. My face was burning. I could feel every single guest watching me, some with pity, others with morbid curiosity. Jonah stood up like he was about to intervene, but I wasn't hearing anything anymore. It was like the whole room became underwater. Then I felt a warm hand on my shoulder. I turned. It was my grandmother, Inez, my mom's mother. She looked me in the eyes and leaned close to my ear. "Your mom did the same to me once," she said softly. But I never spoke. That silence? It cost me everything. That's when everything got quiet. People stopped fidgeting. Even the DJ turned off the background music. You could hear the clink of a fork dropping somewhere in the back. I don't remember walking to the microphone. I don't remember picking it up. But I do remember what I said. I stood at the mic. My heart was pounding so loudly I could hear it in my ears. My hands were shaking, but I kept them at my sides. People were still staring at me, some expecting me to laugh it off, others looking genuinely horrified. I looked straight at my mother. "You want to talk about debt?" I said. "Okay. Let's talk about it." My voice didn't crack. That surprised me. It was steady. Clear. My own voice, finally unfiltered. "You want my salary? The job you mocked? The life you resented? Fine. But while we're assigning value, let's talk about what raising me actually looked like." I wasn't yelling. I didn't need to. You raised me to believe love was a transaction. That every meal, every ride, every ounce of care came with strings attached. You told me I owed you for existing. And now, you're standing here on the happiest day of my life demanding money? In front of my friends, my husband, our families? People were completely silent now. Jonah hadn't moved. I saw his jaw tightening from across the room. I paid for this wedding myself, I continued. Every dollar. Every hour. I worked jobs in college while you told me I was wasting my time. I paid off my loans while you guilt me for not visiting. I built a life you never once believed I could have. And now that I do, you want to take it? I looked around the room briefly. A few guests looked visibly uncomfortable. One of Jonah's cousins nodded quietly at me. No. You don't get that. Not today. Not ever. I handed the mic back to the DJ and walked off. I wasn't crying. I thought I might, but I wasn't. It felt like some steel part of me had been activated. Like everything she'd tried to suppress in me for decades had finally snapped forward into place. Jonah followed quickly behind. He didn't say anything. He just put his hand gently on my back and stayed with me as we walked into the hallway outside the reception room. I leaned against the brick wall, trying to breathe. The cool of the brick steadied me. A minute later, Grandma Inez came through the door. She didn't speak right away. Just stood beside me and looked down the hallway with me like we were staring into something bigger than ourselves. I was 17 when I got married, she finally said. Your mother was 4. I wanted to leave her father so many times, but every time I tried, he'd remind me that I had no money, no job, no family support. That I owed him for everything. She sighed and touched her pearls absent-mindedly. Eventually, I believed him. I stopped trying. I told myself I was doing it for her. But I wasn't. I was just afraid. Inez turned to look at me. Don't be afraid of letting go, Margot. You already walked farther than I ever did. Then she hugged me. Tight. When we returned to the reception, my mother was gone. Quietly slipped out while the guests were still murmuring among themselves. There wasn't a scene. No apology. No goodbye. Jonah's mom approached me about 10 minutes later. She didn't pry, didn't ask details. Just looked me in the eye and said, whatever happens next, you don't owe anyone your peace. Over the next few days, the fallout began. I received 3 texts from my mom the morning after the wedding. No apology, just a strange, clipped message. If you think you're done with me, think again. You don't know what you've started. Followed a few hours later by, your grandmother always pitied you. That's why you turned out weak. And finally, when you're broke and lonely, remember who took care of you when no one else would. I didn't respond. She called once. I didn't answer. Then she sent an email, long, rambling, accusatory. In it, she demanded $25,000 as compensation for raising me. She said she'd consulted an attorney and was prepared to take legal action if I didn't comply. I forwarded the email to a lawyer friend of mine who basically said, there's no legal standing for any of this. She's bluffing. Still, it shook me. Not because I was afraid of paying her. But because even now, even after everything, she believed she could still control me. Jonah was incredible. Supportive, patient, present. He never pushed me to talk before I was ready, but every time I did, he listened. Really listened. I told him things I hadn't told anyone. About the time my mother locked me out of the house for missing curfew. The time she threw away my college acceptance letters because she was sick of hearing about them. The time she told me she hoped I'd fail so I'd have no choice but to come crawling back. He just held me and whispered, you're never going back. But the hardest part wasn't the confrontation. It was the silence that followed. My aunt, my mom's younger sister, called me 2 weeks later. She'd heard what happened at the wedding through one of the cousins who had been there. I'm not surprised, she said. But I am sorry. She told me something I didn't know, that when she was 19 and got a job out of state, my mother told their parents she was running off with a married man and convinced them to cut her off. That Vera had always needed to be the center of the story, even if it meant rewriting everyone else's. I started to piece together a different picture of my family, one where silence wasn't just common, but enforced. One where my mother had long ago learned how to weaponize guilt and truth until everyone around her gave up trying. It made me wonder how different her life could have been if someone, anyone, had called her out before now. What happened at the wedding became a kind of legend in our family. Some relatives called to check in, clearly looking for gossip. A few tried to stay neutral. But no one defended her. No one said she was right. And in some strange way, that silence spoke volumes. Grandma Inez started calling me more often. We'd talk for hours, mostly about nothing, old movies, tea blends, the neighbor's weird dog, but sometimes about the past. Slowly, I began to understand that my mother wasn't born this way. She became this way. Raised in bitterness. Reinforced by silence. But that didn't make it okay. It just made it sad. About a month after the wedding, I got a certified letter in the mail. My mother had filed a small claims petition. She was suing me. The claim was titled Reimbursement for Costs of Upbringing and Emotional Damages. She listed everything from diapers to ballet classes to my prom dress. The total came to $32,780. No receipts. Just her own typed-up list of estimated costs. She also claimed emotional harm from verbal torment suffered at the wedding. It was so absurd, I laughed out loud. I called my lawyer friend again. He said while small claims court doesn't require a lawyer, he'd come with me anyway, mostly to make sure I didn't punch a wall. We went to court 3 weeks later. It was in a small courthouse in Mecklenburg County. The courtroom was nearly empty. My mother was dressed like she was attending a funeral, head to toe black, pearls, hair perfectly sprayed into place. She didn't look at me once. The judge, a tired-looking woman in her 60s, skimmed the papers. Then she looked at my mother. "Ms. Klein, you're suing your daughter for the cost of raising her?" My mother sat straight. "Yes, Your Honor. I did not receive any financial support from her father. I paid for everything myself. I believe I am entitled to reimbursement." The judge raised an eyebrow. "You're aware that legally, parents are obligated to care for their minor children?" My mother paused. "That doesn't mean she shouldn't pay me back now that she's successful." The judge turned to me. "Ms. Klein, do you have a response?" I kept it short. I didn't choose to be born. I didn't agree to a debt. And I don't owe my mother money for basic care. I paid for my adult life myself, college, housing, career. She's retaliating because I refused to give her my salary. The judge nodded, sighed, and dismissed the case in under 5 minutes. My mother didn't move. Just sat there staring forward like she'd just realized the spotlight was finally off her, and no one was rushing to turn it back on. As we left, she whispered to me in the hallway. "You think you've won? You'll see." But I had won. Not in the courtroom. In myself. I knew the revenge she wanted was to see me buckle, to feel guilt, pay up, grovel, beg. But I wasn't going to play her game. So I did something better. Over the next few months, I went quiet. No contact. No reaction. No shared information. She started calling Inez again, looking for updates. Inez shut that down fast. But then I got a strange message from an old family acquaintance, Mrs. Dillard, who used to go to church with us. She told me my mother had been spreading rumors. Saying Jonah was abusive. That I had a drug problem. That I lashed out in front of the whole family at the wedding. At first, I felt rage bubbling up. Then I had an idea. I went back into my email inbox and pulled out every message, voicemail transcript, and written text my mother had sent me over the past year. Her rants. Her threats. Her accusations. Her lawsuit papers. The works. I compiled it all into a PDF and shared it with exactly 3 people: my aunt, the pastor at the old church, and her employer. Why her employer? Because my mother was a part-time accountant at a small local nonprofit that helps women transition out of abusive households. I know, ironic. That same nonprofit had recently applied for a government grant to expand their services. Part of the application required that all staff adhere to strict ethical guidelines, including not intimidating or threatening family members, especially related to finances. My message to her employer was factual, not vindictive. I simply said, I thought you should be aware of the behavior of your employee Vera Klein. I believe it is relevant to your organization's mission. Attached are documented communications that demonstrate a pattern of financial coercion and emotional intimidation. A week later, I got a brief email: "Thank you for bringing this to our attention. We are conducting a formal review. Vera Klein is currently on administrative leave." I didn't feel triumphant. I felt clean. A few weeks after that, I received a card in the mail. No return address. Inside, it just said, "You've burned your last bridge. Don't expect a call when I'm gone." I tossed it in the trash. As for my grandmother, Inez, she started visiting more often. We began a Sunday tradition: early dinner at my place, tea on the balcony, stories about her life. She told me about the time she almost ran away to Nashville. About the little bookstore she once dreamed of opening. About how she had sewn her own wedding dress at 16. One Sunday, she brought an old photo album and a box. The box contained every letter she'd written but never sent. Letters to her own mother. To my mother. To herself. Letters filled with things she wanted to say but never did. She said she didn't want them to die with her. I cried reading them. Not because they were sad, though some were, but because I saw the echoes of her life in mine, and I realized, the difference between us wasn't what we endured. It was what we did next. A few months later, Jonah and I bought a home just outside Charlotte. Nothing fancy, a 3-bedroom fixer-upper with a big backyard and creaky floorboards that we swore we'd never fix because they gave it character. Jonah started planting a garden. I started therapy. I also started writing blog posts, then articles, then stories. I wrote about toxic families, financial torment, inherited silence. I used a pseudonym, but the words were mine. One of my essays went viral. Then another. I started getting emails from strangers saying, "I thought I was alone. Thank you." And that? That was my final, quiet revenge. Not screaming at my mother. Not fighting fire with fire. But turning her poison into something useful. Something that made people feel seen. I haven't heard from her since. Maybe one day she'll reach out again. Maybe she won't. Either way, I'm not afraid. Because silence may be what built the prison, but voice, that's what opened the door. And I walked out.